Hi everyone, welcome to your next lesson. This is in the series of power and conflict unit that we're looking at poems, and Mr Caseman and I are going to have a discussion today. We're going to be talking about Bayonet, Charge and Kamikaze. We're going to have a discussion which will hopefully help you when you come to write your comparative essay that we're going to set for you, because we're kind like that. We're going to have a chat about some of the themes and how they overlap. We're going to talk about the language and structure of the poems and kind of how they are similar and different, so you can get some sort of idea about the way you would talk about them in your essay. Is that right?
That is right. Essentially what we're doing is just preparing you guys for an actual question that you'll face in year 11 on conflict and power and conflict. So it's basically a comparison between two poems. You'll get given one poem in the exam, and it's your choice of which poem to compare it to. So today we're just choosing these two poems because they're very closely related.
And because we like them.
Yes.
So we thought we'd like to talk about these ones. So I'm going to start off by talking about some of the themes that I think are in Bayonet Charge in relation to conflict. And then hopefully we can have a little think about how they relate to Kamikaze. So I think when we're looking at Bayonet Charge, if we're considering the idea of conflict, and you might get a question that says, how is conflict presented in Bayonet Charge in one other poem? There's lots of things you can do when you're thinking about conflict with this poem. So you could actually look at conflict, I think, as the war that is happening in this poem. And I would say that probably Ted Hughes is exploring conflict and its consequences, and that could be consequences on the individual, a person who is a soldier, and what kind of transformation that happens there. And I think also conflict and perhaps its consequences on the natural environment could also be relevant to this poem. But I think probably the biggest area of conflict I see is that between personal identity, like the individual, and kind of what happens when you're placed in this kind of situation. If I'm thinking about, I don't know, I always think that this poem is really about kind of some kind of battle in the First World War, and it makes me think about the soldiers who were kind of encouraged to be very patriotic about their countries and to go and fight, and that was the good and the right thing to do, and then kind of the reality of what happens to a person who then embarks on that.
Yeah, lovely use of the word embark there. Taken directly from Kamikaze.
Oh yeah, we're so good. You're so lucky to have us.
Well, yeah, so embarking on this journey, it's a similar thing with this pilot. In a sense, forced by his country to perform this act, this suicide mission, for the good of the country, just like Bayonet Charge in terms of being patriotic. In this sense, it's a national thing, it's a cultural thing for them to do.
Yeah, I think that's quite interesting when we think about kind of the cultural expectation and how that's dressed up. So, the idea that you are it's very overtly that you are going to go and give your life. Whereas I think perhaps probably if we're looking at it from like a British perspective, the idea it was very much kind of euphemised, wasn't it, that word? Euphemisms of kind of giving your life. It was all about glory and kind of going into battle rather than actually, that's actually what's going to happen. Essentially, that's what's going to happen to this character as well.
Yeah. So this pilot is embarking on this mission for his country. The first stanza, you can see a lot of references to Japan and Japanese culture. You can see the cultural kind of impact on him in terms of the incantations. A very powerful word there, powerful incantations, to show that it's almost like a spell being placed on an individual to feel like they have to give themselves and sacrifice themselves for a country.
Yeah, it's almost like they've removed the kind of independence of thoughts. It's been replaced by these incantations, these kind of these things that he's been told that are in his head. He doesn't any longer think for himself.
So we have as you say there, the conflict then becomes between culture, the nation, people that are telling him that this is the right thing to do, just like Bayonet charge, but versus what is actually happening when the individual gets into the war scenario, just like Bayonet charge.
Yeah, and you kind of see it in a slightly different way here, but there is still that idea that you've got an individual who's signed up to go and kind of do this, but actually the reality, there is no time for individual thought or kind of independent thought. You know, suddenly he awoke and he was running, and it's just that kind of idea that he's thrown right into the kind of brutality of that situation. No time to think about it. You know, he's stumbling across the field. He's dazzled with rifle fire, but he's also probably dazzled by the initially perhaps the glorification of war, but actually the reality is the bullets coming at you, and you can hear them smacking the belly out of the air. The reality of what actually is going to happen, you know, the violence, the language, the smashed arm, that's very different to this patriotic tear that grinned in his eye.
So similarly, I mean, we're jumping into kind of I guess a structural thing that we're talking about suddenly in the fast-paced aspect of Bayonet charge. In Kamikaze, it's a bit slow. He's actually got time to think. Halfway there, he might have thought is what the daughter thinks. So it's almost like he's flying towards his mission and he's hovering above the air and looking down at the ocean. So he actually has time to think and become an individual in a sense. And think about what he's actually doing, looking at the fishing boats, looking at his past, remembering his childhood, his brother and his father, a fisher. So it's different to Bayonet charge that in terms of the pace, this soldier has time to think. And therefore, you know, he's not like thrown into the battle like the soldier in Bayonet charge.
Although interestingly, and one of the things I really love about this poem, I know we've spoken about it before, is that I actually really like what the poet does with the structure here and what he does with time in this poem, and very different to Kamikaze in the sense that actually everything is very fast in the first stanza, and he's dazzled by this battle that's happening he's thrown into. Actually, the poet then kind of creates this almost like a slow motion. It reminds me, I think I said it in the lesson, the idea that, you know, when you're watching a film quite often about war, and they'll slow it down and they speed it back up again. And I think again at that point, when he is slowing down, there's just that moment, just that split second where he wonders, you know, how he has got here, or what is going to happen next. You know, what cold clockwork of the stars and the nations was he the hand pointing that second? You know, what part is he? How is this going to turn out for him?
So there is time to think. But there's a split
second because then he doesn't have time, and again that independence of thought is taken away because he's literally, you know, he's running like a man who's jumped up in the dark and runs, listening between the footfalls. The reason that he's still running, we don't know why almost.
It's almost like just survival.
And there is that kind of idea, isn't there? And both of them, you know, if you think about what they're both doing, they're both essentially being turned into human weapons of destruction.
That is a similarity.
And there's the similarity, and I think, you know, this is almost, as this poem continues, it is that transformation. He becomes this kind of machine, this destructive machine, and by the end, he's kind of fueled by his terror and panic. He's become this kind of like deadly weapon.
So summarizing, we'd say that there is conflict between the culture, the society, and the individual, conflict within the individual as well. Thinking about what they're doing versus what they have to do. So your character in that form is survival versus performing his duty. This character in Kamikaze is essentially, you know, should he carry out this activity or survive and stay alive as well? So it's similar in a sense in conflict. And there's also the conflict in nature as well.
I thought we did briefly talk about that. I think there's two ways you could look at it. I mean, you could see, if you were going to be quite basic about it, say, well, actually, world. It's quite an unusual poem, really. And you do have that very vivid image of the yellow hair that's thrown up by the shot-slashed furrows, rolled like a flame, crawled in a circle with its mouth wide open and silent. You know, it's the destructive impact of conflict on the natural world. But I think also if we're looking at it from a metaphorical perspective, you know, so often the natural world provides solace and nurture and kind of well-being, I suppose. And the environment that this is set against, which is the natural environment, is completely at odds with that. He almost completely subverts the idea of the natural environment being this kind of nurturing place. You know, he's going towards this green hedge, rifle fire coming out of it. He is stumbling over these big clods of mud. His hair is kind of rolling in front of him, almost like might make it like a grenade or something. And I think that is probably some form of message about the absolute so against our nature, you know, so against everything that really we should stand for, to be embarking on these, that word again, in these kind of violent exchanges.
Yeah. I think there's a difference there in terms of nature. In Kamikaze, nature provides that solace for the pilot. It provides that comfort. He's able to look at it.
He's able to stop and look,
and look at it and think, what am I doing? You know, I need to survive. I need to see this ocean, this, you know, these boats come out like bunting, celebration of life.
Yeah.
So it provides solace, but there is an element that it doesn't do the same thing in terms of show the impact of war on nature, but it shows that there is conflict in nature as well.
Yeah.
And that's against man versus nature, because his father's fishing.
Yeah.
He's effectively killing these fish. And the tuna itself, the dark prince, it's almost like to capture that powerful creature that, you know, symbolizes for me the kind of conflict in nature itself and man versus nature as well.
That's really interesting. I've never thought of it in that way before. And that's why it's good to have these discussions, because, you know, we could have this discussion 20 times over and we'd probably come up with different things that we would talk about. And that's why it's important that you learn to not be worried about saying the right thing or getting it right or wrong. It's really kind of what you take when you're reading these poems. Yeah.
So should we have a discussion about imagery?
We could have a go.
Have a little discussion about maybe some of the 2 or 3 more powerful images in your poem that you'd like to discuss and the techniques that are being used.
So I think when we're looking at this poem, I mean, there's a lot of the thing about this poem is it's very visceral in the sounds and sights, and so that is obviously repeated in some of the kind of the images. Like I always pick up the he lugged a rifle, numb as a smashed arm, and that always resonates with me because I think I mentioned it already. It makes me think of the like the violence in that language, but also obviously it's a simile there. But I think alluding to the kind of how you can have your senses smashed out of you. You become desensitized when you're a soldier. Again, the loss of kind of the person, your identity. So I think that's quite an effective one.
Can I say something about that?
Yeah.
Arm? It always makes me feel so uncomfortable. It's almost like sleeping on your arm and having that dead arm. And waking up with that dead arm and feeling like there's nothing in it. It's dead, effectively. Obviously, smashed adds another element to it. Very gruesome imagery of the effects of war on an individual.
Yeah. And the image of this patriotic tear sweating like molten iron from the center of his chest. I think that's quite an interesting image, and I've quite often pondered kind of what that means. And it makes me think of, you know, when things are in forge, when you like the Industrial Revolution or something, when things are created in this very hot furnace. Perhaps that's where this kind of where the powers that be managed to get people to do this sort of thing. It's kind of like creating something with inside. It started off as something patriotic and it's turned into something more solid, that's literally kind of grown from inside this kind of furnace. I don't know, I just think that's quite a powerful image. And I think the other bit is the bit at the end. Well, I mentioned the hair because I would always pick that out because I think it's a horrendous image. But the last bit, and I said quite often you can hear what's happening in this poem. There's quite a lot of here, and to get out of that blue crackling air, the sound of that. And actually, when I teach this poem, I quite often start with just some of these words and kind of what those connotations are. And when I think of the blue crackling air, it makes me think of like dynamite and you know, that smell that you get when something's kind of burning, and the danger from that crackling air. It just sounds like it's all going to ignite. It just sounds so dangerous.
All right, so mine, in Kamikaze, the strung out like bunting, the fishing boat. So that simile then obviously creates the image of a celebration. So he's going towards his death in a suicide mission, and he's seeing these boats, and they're strung out like bunting. It's a reminder of birthdays, of life, of parties. So that, you know, is a strong image of nature there, not necessarily nature, but a strong image of memories, and the power of nostalgia, the power of memories, and how they create that conflict between what he has to do and the memories of his past. And obviously, by the end, the memories of his past win. So that simile, there's a strong image of the conflict between his memories of his past and what he has to do. Considering also the fish, the dark shoals of fishes flashing silver as their bellies swivel towards the sun. So in that we have a contrast as well, dark versus light, and that in itself is also another form of conflict.
Do you know what it makes me think of, that image of their flashing bellies? It actually makes me think of the plane as it would kind of make its final descent. That's what it makes me think of.
It works in almost 2 ways, and maybe different other ways, if you know.
And also the dark, the dark shoals of fishes as well. That kind of that dread, that dark undertone, that kind of fear of what this is going to bring. Either way.
Yeah, so it works on multi levels. Also, the fish as well, like a huge flag. First wave one way, then the other. So I always get the image of a flag waving, and it's almost a sign for me of surrender. So when someone is surrendering, they wave a flag. So nature itself is starting to reflect his whole mood and his whole attitude. What he feels is almost reflected back to him in what he sees in nature.
Yeah, and actually, I'm sure there's something. Oh yeah, my father embarked at sunrise, because that makes me think of the flag. Actually, the Japanese flag, and it's almost as if nature's got its own flag as well. That kind of, you know, you can have kind of switches his allegiance almost, doesn't he?
And there is a strong contrast there between how it begins and how it ends up, because at sunrise it's quite a positive tone to it as well. It's like embarked. It's like you're going on a journey. It's a new adventure to experience. But then we see that with the but in the second stanza, but halfway there, it suggests a contrast between what he might have felt at the beginning, what everyone says.
But maybe that it still is a journey, and it's still a journey of discovery. So he does still, you know, perhaps that's where the sunrise imagery actually comes from. Actually, he's going on a journey of enlightenment and to reclaim his self and his identity.
Good. We talk about structure.
Oh, yeah, you can go first. Structure. So, I've said quite a bit about structure, actually.
Yeah, so structurally, I think I've just mentioned about the but in the second stanza and how it begins on. And I think is what Miss is saying is about the journey itself. It's almost like a journey being pulled from different perspectives.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
So it begins with her father. So there's a third person narrating this and telling us what this young lady and her father experienced. And it begins this sunrise and then it moves on to but. So there's things to discover on this journey. And she thought, so we're still getting this perspective from this third person narrator, but then structurally it goes into the italics, as you can see in the last few stanzas. And that's where we get the first person. I think what that does is it personalizes this. It takes it from some story being told by somebody else, and it kind of shows you the personal effects of war on individuals. Not only the pilot, but this pilot's children had to suffer in terms of they lost a father effectively by not being able to speak to him. They too learned.
Yeah.
And I think that's why the poet takes it to the first person to show us on a personal level how war affects individuals.
And also to encapsulate, I think, the generational difference and kind of it's quite a hopeful poem, isn't it? Because by the end of it, and because you understand then who's talking about it, they're able to appreciate and to kind of show us the impact of kind of what impact that had on him and his family, and kind of the really actually quite sad outcome of that. And I suppose it's quite a hopeful poem in the sense that there's some hope going forward, that perhaps we can understand the impact that we've had, the impact that conflict can have, and that there is an opportunity for a different way of thinking.
I think the last two lines of the poem actually link to that idea of the generation kind of starting to think. Sometimes she said he must have wondered which had been the better way to die.
Yeah.
So the younger generation are able to put themselves in other people's shoes. They're able to empathize with individuals and ponder, you know, is it better to die for your country or die by being effectively isolated? To stand up for your ideals and be an individual or perish?
Yeah, because then you look at kind of this poem, and if we're going to talk about structure, and we've talked about kind of how the beginning you're very much immersed in the battle and it slows down, and the end is very much kind of, there is no resolution like there is in this poem. You know, we just end up with this unnamed, unidentified soldier kind of hurtling himself into oblivion, and it's quite a hopeless poem. It feels quite hopeless by the end because of that. And actually then the reflection is down to us, you know, to kind of, you just feel like at the end there's an explosion or whatever, and that's the end of that. There is no element of closure in the poem, I don't think.
So I guess we could speak about tone then. I mean, you just ended on that tone of...
It's keeping me on my toes today, Mr Caseman. Yeah, I think it's quite futile, this poem. I think it's really dark. Hetty's was dark, but I think it's a really dark poem. I feel like there's maybe perhaps a glimpse of hope. In bewilderment, then he almost stopped. And actually, I feel the bewilderment and the anger of the poet coming through there. You know, in bewilderment there, he almost stopped. You know, in what cold clockwork, stars and nations, you know, in what kind of world is this happening? In what kind of world is this happening? And then he sends him hurtling into oblivion. It's sort of, and there is a violence within this, and it's not just the violence of conflict, the actual battle that's happening. There's a violence there's an anger in this poem that I think comes through. There's also places in there, you know, even the where I plunge past with his bayonet towards the green hedge, this kind of blindness to everything. And I think even, you know, that image again, bullets smacking the belly out of the air, the way it's written is it's quite savage, I think.
So we're touching onto language and tone, which is a good thing, because you've looked at the words, the plosive verbs, and that smacking idea. I think it's similar in this one, that this poet also used some interesting language, which creates a kind of a somber, tranquil tone, but there's also an element of sadness. So there's a lot of sibilance, you know, salt, sudden, awash, shore, kind of a relaxed tone, which suggests...
Think of the tide kind of thing.
Yes. So it's almost that kind of idea of traveling and moving with the tide, so to speak, just going along with the journey that he's been set on, but obviously coming back almost like a tide
Yeah.
itself. So that's, and you know, the green blue translucent sea is quite calm and relaxed, and I think that suggests his maybe a closure of emotions as he's traveling. He's trying to close off himself and he's just looking, just taking in the scenario. So, but it's also a hopeful tone as well.
Poignant.
Yeah, so it's a hopeful tone. It's kind of relaxing, and the language is used to kind of reinforce that idea that he's almost at peace with what he has to do.
Almost like I sound like a hippie now, like healing. It's quite healing, a healing poem, and maybe it is that kind of idea of trying to heal over past atrocities.
Yeah, but you know, again, but there's still kind of a sadness in it that, you know, the father we loved. It's talking about him in past tense when he was actually alive when she was there. So there's also a sense of loss as well, and that kind of language of the past tense referring to him, that kind of links into that idea as well. Is there anything else we need to discuss?
I don't know. Is there? Answers on a postcard.
All right, so we've looked at themes, conflict, inner conflict, conflict between man versus nature, conflict between man versus society. Looked at some of the strongest images that help us to understand those conflicts. Consider structure as well, how structure is used to do that. And we kind of ended there with tone and language at the same time.
Because we're amazing.
Yeah, so so it's up to you now. What we'd like, we're gonna obviously provide a lesson for you guys to do where you compare. There will be a handy little table for you to fill in, which will help you get some quotations and some points together. And then after that, it's simply a case of putting those into paragraphs.
Yeah, I think we'll model the first paragraph so you can see, and it will be, again, you've done this before in class, but we'll model the paragraph for you. So you can see kind of how you might structure that kind of answer.
Okay.
But yeah.
We'll turn the recording off.
Okay, bye.